So to start off the podcast this week, we're going to do All in the Family. So if anyone clicked on this on YouTube and you only want to hear about All in the Family, just skip ahead 2 minutes because I've got a podcast admin, just podcast crap I wanted to bring up. So this podcast, we started it way back in the day when I was traveling, and it's called Calling Home because it's like a lot of times I do podcasts with ulterior motives, kind of like, if I don't have a reason to call home, I just wouldn't do it. I keep putting it off, but it's like, oh, we got a podcast, so let's just do it, and now I come over here every week and we watch an old TV show. But again, it's so I actually come across town and I don't just put it off, and it's just fun to do a podcast. But I like to couch the two things together. It's a good way to motivate myself. But also, if I don't have a clever name for a podcast, I just call it what it is. So like my writing podcast is called How to Write a Novel. And this podcast was about calling home. So it's called Calling Home.
You were calling home.
Yeah. And I just figure like if you don't have a clever name, at least it just explains what it is. It keeps it clear. But now that we've been doing this TV thing and we've done more episodes of the TV stuff than we did the calling home stuff, because that was quite intermittent. Obviously it was just whenever I would call home. And this we've been doing every week. So I was like, it could be time for a rebranding since it's not about calling home at all. But, I was like, whatever, who cares? It doesn't really matter what a podcast is called, especially on YouTube. No one gives a shit. But I just had a little brainstorm the other day because when I post these on YouTube, I always call it Revisiting Whatever. Again, just to explain what it is. So this week we'll be Revisiting All in the Family. So someone will know this is a video, although it's really just audio, but about going back to Perry Mason, revisiting that 70s show, whatever. And it just occurred to me all of a sudden, since I always title them that on YouTube, why don't we call this podcast Revisiting? Because not only are we revisiting old shows, but I'm revisiting you here on the North Side every week over and over. I just keep coming over to visit.
All right. That makes sense.
So, I just got to make a new logo. It doesn't matter. It's all back-end shit. But it's just like, because then I also thought once I start traveling again, we would just revert back to the old style. But probably we're not gonna. Probably we're just gonna keep talking about old TV shows. So it took a while to solidify the shift. But it just suddenly occurred to me that since I'm already titling them that on YouTube, and it's like, finally, after fucking 5 years or however long it's been. Actually, maybe it's been longer than that. Anyway, I think it'll just, I'm not gonna go back and rename the old ones or anything. I'll just, from here on in, this episode will be the, bloop, we've changed from Calling Home to Revisiting with Barb and Keith or whatever. So it still sort of explains. I guess it explains better than Calling Home. Calling Home just doesn't make sense anymore. But yeah, it just occurred to me the other day. Like, hey, why not? Revisiting. I like that title. It's kind of good.
Okay.
So this week, we're revisiting All in the Family. So how this came about is because we watched King of Kensington, which is a 70s sitcom that you knew from the 70s, and I knew from going to the actual Kensington neighborhood in Toronto. And I'd just never seen it before, so it's like, all right, let's go revisit King of Kensington. And I didn't particularly like it because it's really political. It's really of the era. Like, the jokes were extremely topical and fresh at the time, so of course that makes them not timeless, and they made no sense to me. And just that the whole tone was nice guy, liberal version of Archie Bunker is how I kind of took it. Does that sound sort of accurate to you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we talked a lot on that episode from 2 weeks back about, because again, I know of All in the Family, but I've never really sat down to watch it. Basically, I was kind of coming to the conclusion that I feel like I would probably like All in the Family better because it's a similar type of show. Here's just an everyman, working man type of guy. But instead of this beautiful leftist utopian Canadian ideal of what this guy would be like, All in the Family is, no, here's what the guy's really like.
He's every man's bigot.
Right. And I remember you saying that, like, when that show was on at the time, that you felt like other people were not getting that was the idea.
Absolutely. There was all kinds of people that I knew who refused to watch it because they couldn't stand that man. And the things that he talked about, they just couldn't watch it. And they were missing the whole message is that he's every man, and he is the bigotry and the prejudice and all of that I'm not saying everybody's got it, but there's a heck of a lot of people who have that, and he is representative of that. And even today, All in the Family, to me, is as relevant today as it was when it was first made, because that stuff is still very, very prevalent out there.
And it's funny, I just find, like, if you take the surface kind of cartoon version of the left and the right politically, it is like the right are like, bathe in the blood of the workers, we're the cruel rich people, we don't want to pay taxes. And then the cartoon version of the left is like, we can't even bring up these topics. It's like the thought police. Like, you can't even say these things without ever looking at why it's being said and who's making the show. Because the point we made on that King of Kensington episode, obviously it's not a writer's room full of Archie Bunkers writing that show. It's not like a bunch of bigots wrote a show about bigotry. It's the opposite, which is it's just funny to not get that,
And the sad thing about Archie Bunker would not be seen on television today, because he addressed issues that are out there. There's no question, it's all there. But people don't like to talk about racism. They don't like to talk about black versus white, poor versus rich, anybody of color who doesn't fit into the mainstream. They just don't want to talk about it, but it's out there. And but still, it would not be put on TV.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like an irony of. I do think things are better overall, but it's at a weird cost. It's like things with the internet age and Twitter and social media. When bad stuff happens or people act badly, it's easier to expose them, and it's easier to like turn over the rock and expose the horrible grubs to the sunlight. But at the same time, it's called like cancel culture, where if you do say something people don't like, there's no discussion. You're canceled. Everyone just dog piles on you and you're done for. And I don't know, there's just a lot of weird examples. Particularly in Canada, where we have stuff like, I guess it's the kind of thing I guess that would come up now if there were a new version of All in the Family. Stuff like trans rights, transgender people. And like there was a big deal in universities in Ontario of they were going to like make it basically law that you have to refer to people by the proper gender pronoun that they want and stuff, which it's like, it's well-meaning. It's trying to progress things forward. But when you make it a law, it's too far. It's like you can't force Archie Bunker to call a transgender woman she, for instance. You can't. But
and even if you do, what has it changed for him?
Yeah, exactly.
If he still feels a prejudice or a hate or something, just because you call something by another name doesn't fix that problem.
Yeah, it's like the symptoms, and what's that saying? With you want to fix the cause, not the symptoms. So I've got some factoids about All in the Family. So it aired on CBS for 9 seasons from January 1971 till April 1979. So if I remember right, King of Kensington started in 75, right? So
yes, it did.
So All in the Family had been going for a while, and it was part of the wave of post shows. But there was a show before it too, it turns out. But ran for 9 seasons, 205 episodes. Afterwards, it was continued with spin-offs. Archie Bunker's Place apparently ran for 4 more seasons. I never even heard of that show.
Bunker's Place, I can't place that.
And then different stuff. Maude and Sanford and Son, they're like in the same universe.
And the rich bunch, that the black people that moved up to the south side.
The Jeffersons.
The Jeffersons, yes. There were a lot of spin-offs of that.
And that's all not coincidence, because this show was created by a guy named Norman Lear, who also made Maude, Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, Good Times. He's currently 100 years old and is not dead. Which is shocking, because everyone's always dead when we do these old TV shows.
I saw probably about, not that long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, somebody did an interview of Norman Lear. And he was probably about 90 at that time, so it would be 10 years ago. What a fascinating man. His whole history, born in the Bronx, hard coming up through the Depression, that sort of thing. Just a fascinating man to listen to.
He worked on all these shows, but I don't know the origins of all these other ones necessarily. Maude and Sanford and Sons and the Jeffersons, like where, except
a lot of them were people who were people who showed up in the Archie Bunker series.
Right.
Like the Jeffersons moved into the neighborhood, and of course there was this big hate on, my goodness, you've got a black family moving into this white neighborhood, and Archie's all upset and trying to get all the other neighbors to kick them out. And they turn out to be their best friends.
Right.
They live right next door, and they turn out to be wonderful, wonderful people that Archie does finally come to accept. And then they get some money somewhere. Mr. Jefferson, he runs a dry cleaning place or something, but somehow he makes all this money and they move on up.
Even that's kind of admirable, just that so many sitcom spin-offs kind of worked out. I mean, Maude, the only reason I know Maude is there's a famous thing that the final moments of the Super Bowl one time got cut off so they could play Maude. And it's like nobody in the world wanted to see Maude. No one cared.
Maude is like I think she's supposed to be like a feminine version of Archie Bunker. Really outspoken woman, but very liberated. Like, she believes in abortion and she believes in sex out of marriage and all this stuff that would not be mainstream television. But she's not a bigot like Archie, but she's very outspoken, and she's the man of the house in her house.
Yeah, it's impressive just that these spin-offs actually worked in that era, because in my era of like the 90s and the 2000s, spin-offs never worked. Like, Friends is the most successful sitcom of all time, and then Joey goes to the West Coast to be an actor. No, thank you. Like, I can't think of a single successful.
The people in Friends are just nice. They're all nice people.
Right.
The people in the spin-offs are not necessarily nice people. Archie Bunker is not necessarily a nice person. Maude is not a nice person. She puts her husband down and treats him like he's a shit on her shoe. The Jeffersons, again, you've got the Mrs. Jefferson, very outspoken black woman.
Which, again, I mean, that's kind of was my problem again with King of Kensington, because I mean, I was kind of raised on the super cynical Married with Children, and then that segued straight into the just cruel, what's the word, selfishness of Seinfeld. So, like, for me, when I watch these old sitcoms about nice people, I could give a fuck. Who cares?
Well, none of these spin-off people are necessarily nice people. Like, they're good people. In their heart, they really are good, but they're not saccharine or sweet, or you don't finish the show saying, my goodness, I just love that person. I'd love to have that person for a best friend. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't, because they'd be putting you in your place all the time.
So another detail about All in the Family I did not know, which I guess shouldn't be surprising because I don't know shit about anything really from this era, but it was based on a British sitcom. So we had our time when we were doing British shows, or I guess we did mostly British versions of American shows, and we didn't do too much of the reverse.
What's the British show?
It's called Till Death Us Do Part. It began in 1965, and Norman Lear said when he saw it, it portrayed a relationship just like the one between his father and himself. So that's obviously the Rob Reiner character and the Carol O'Connor character, except the British version.
There's something about that seems to ring a bell with me, but I can't remember what it is, so maybe we need to check that one out.
Yeah, I'm sure. I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm sure there must be some around. But yeah, so when he saw that and he's like, ding ding, I'm gonna make an American version of that, which again, I haven't looked much into Norman Lear's career, but yeah, so it's I don't know if this was his first show or if he did stuff before, but All in the Family, based on a British show, which, yeah, it's just surprising how often that happens and how often it's not really known that...
And you know what's nice about it is they give credit. Norman Lear could say, oh no, I just had that idea myself from life and people I know around me, but he doesn't. He says, no, I saw a British TV show and that gave me the idea, and I ran with it.
And then, yeah, I guess we've kind of already covered this, but, just the wiki thing saying how the show revolves around the life of a working class man and his family. Show broke ground in its depiction of issues previously considered unsuitable for U.S. network television comedy, such as, there's a long list, racism, anti-Semitism, infidelity, homosexuality, women's liberation, rape, religion, miscarriages, abortion, breast cancer, the Vietnam War, menopause, and impotence. And though depicting these controversial issues, the series became arguably one of television's most influential comedic programs, as it injected the sitcom format with more dramatic moments and realistic topical conflicts. All in the Family is often regarded in the United States as one of the greatest television series in history. So, yeah.
I would agree.
And of course, you will not be at all surprised to learn that the first time I ever became aware of All in the Family was because of The Simpsons. they had a flashback episode about when Maggie was born, and they start at the piano and Marge and Homer sing the All in the Family song, but with comedy lyrics. And Rob Reiner, I knew as the director of Spinal Tap. I had no idea he was an actor.
That he had a previous life
Yeah.
as Meatball.
It's very similar to, what's the kid's name from Happy Days who became a director?
Oh, Ron Howard.
Yeah, Ron Howard. I was vaguely aware of Ron Howard as an actor, but mainly I know him as a director. So it's just funny, the reverse, right? Like, everybody else...
Meathead. Yeah, Rob Reiner is Meathead.
But it's just funny in cases like that, right? Where everybody else, when they saw Spinal Tap, they're like, hey, look at that. It's the dude from All in the Family. Where I, years later, when I became aware of All in the Family, I was like, that's the guy from Spinal Tap, but young. Just, how you come into things from opposite sides. So one thing, too, we run into sometimes with old shows is it's interesting to start with the first one, but sometimes the first episode is not really representative of a show because it hasn't gotten its shit together yet. But I looked up a list of top 10 episodes of All in the Family, and one of the top 10 was the first episode. So I'm like, perfect. Checks both boxes so we can watch the first one and be confident that it's also a good episode. So
Okay.
First episode of All in the Family. This episode is called Meet the Bunkers.
From Television City in Hollywood. Boy, the way Glenn Miller played.
Songs that made the hit parade.
Guys like us, we had it made.
Those were the days.
But who had the good taste to pick it out? Go on, will you, meathead?
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to, for next week, track down the British version. Because, yeah, it's always interesting to see how things relate from one to the other. But, yeah, that was definitely like, it is one of those things, too, where we can never be sure when we go into these things. Like, we hypothesize, like, oh, we might like the show, might not like this show. But it's nice when it turns out, where I was saying how I had a feeling I would like this more as far as the King of Kensington era of sitcoms go. And I definitely did. Like, you just can feel right away those shows there's a reason why they're like the classic shows, They just have like energy right away. And the situation is really clear and everything is just has that classic feel or whatever.
And everybody that's in that, we all know everybody. We all know those people.
Right. Yeah, they just like it's really well balanced too, because first off, it's funny to think of people at the time not getting that Archie Bunker's the butt of the joke. Seems very clear to me. But at the same time, Rob Reiner's character is very obnoxious. Like, they balanced it out quite well.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hang out with that guy either.
No, see, he's the foil for everything that Archie says. Rob Reiner is the foil.
Yeah, so it's like, obviously I don't agree with all of Archie Bunker's various political views and, racist weird shit that he says. But at the same time, when Rob Reiner starts going off on his highfalutin blah, 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 I'm very much with Archie when he's like, shut up. Like, no one wants to hear all your, like, I understand how the world should be bullshit. So, yeah, it's a good balance, definitely.
Yeah, it's well written. Well written.
Yeah, so that's where it will be interesting, because I also saw at the end there, written by Norman Lear. But it will be interesting to see the British one and see if it is just sort of thematically the same, or if it is one of those situations where they just took a show and turned it into an American thing. I'm kind of curious. But yeah, on the other hand, though, it does also feel like, man, it's hard to imagine 9 seasons and 200 episodes, because I feel like that pilot really nailed it so hard. Like, it's so clear. Here's not only what the characters are and here's what the situation is, but here's the point of this show.
But this show didn't just stagnate and always be like that. They gave a little hint there at the end, where Rob Reiner says, I didn't know you had such a soft heart. You're such a softie, Archie. And as that show develops, you do see a much softer side of Archie, like Rob and the meathead and Gloria have a little baby later, and that the grandfather thing like really changes him. But he's always still that character, but you get to see a softer side. You get to see the early shows. It's just always putting down Edith, putting down Edith, putting down Edith. But Edith gets a little bit of a backbone too, and you see a relationship more between them. You do see like a softer side of him. So by the time you see the end of that show, all the characters are quite different. They've all softened. They've all lived their lives and run up against all these things in the world that kind of just make people change.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be funny if they did, like in wrestling, they call it a double turn, where at the start of the match, one guy's a good guy and one guy's a bad guy, but by the end it's switched. Or what if by season 9, Archie Bunker was calmed down, and what if Meathead was like, maybe he's become more cynical. That would be kind of interesting, just that the world is tougher than he thought it was or whatever. But yeah, it is interesting too with Archie Bunker, where it does seem like a good character, where he has so many negative qualities, but they also make it clear that his biggest problem is that he just has this huge blind spot to himself, because he legitimately thinks he's friends with that guy Lionel, the black dude who does repair work for him, even though he was literally a minute before that saying weird stuff that is like not directly insulting black people, but it's how else can you take it? As Meathead brought up, what's his real name? Michael.
Michael. Michael Stivic.
Yeah, whereas he brought up is like, yeah, like, you're dancing around it, like you've got plausible deniability, but how else am I supposed to take these things that you're saying if not as an insult to black people? But then he's like, but I got a black friend right here. I work with some Jews down at work. And yeah, like he's really, so it's like you can see that path to redemption is possible, because he, in his weird way, he doesn't think he's a bad guy.
Oh, he doesn't think he's a bad guy at all. He doesn't think he's prejudiced.
Right.
But he does represent a world where certain people think that there are other people in the world who are undeserving. They don't work. They just waste everybody's time. And my goodness, they had so many words in there, like for Jewish people. I can't even think of what they all were, but there had to be at least 10 different words for Jewish people that are derogatory. But Archie doesn't see that as derogatory, because everybody he knows, they all talk like that.
Yeah, I mean, in my specific generation, I've talked about this a lot with my friends who I grew up with and stuff, is just like, I guess for us it's like gay slurs were the thing in the 80s, where it was so normal when I was a kid hanging out with the neighborhood kids, be like, someone falls down off their bike and scrapes their knee, and you're like, quit crying, you fag. We just didn't think about it. And then you grow up and you meet some gay people and you're like, oh man, that's a weird thing to say. But we just literally, no one thought about it at the time.
And that is what you're introduced to with the Archie Bunker character. And especially with they open up with that song about how much better things were when they were young. In the Depression, they need a Hubert Hoover, they need their old LaSalle, how great it ran. You know what? Life was no better than it was for them now. Probably not as good financially and all that sort of thing. But that was the blue collar workers of the United States, white people. They felt that everybody else, the immigrants and that, were coming in and taking all their jobs and taking all their money, and really it hasn't changed any. I don't find it's the same.
The other things that show made me think of that were just more about sitcom history it is very reminiscent of Married with Children, even just the whole layout of the way the house looks, and that it's, the fourth wall thing where there's the 3 walls and then the fourth wall is not there. That whole style is the same. And Married with Children is very much like that same scenario, but all the wind is out of the sails. Like in this show, Archie Bunker is still, he's kind of a nobody. He's just whatever cog in society, and he's obviously feels like he's losing his spot on top as the white man, and but he still has that bluster of like, I'm gonna still pretend I'm the top dog and I'm the king of the castle, whether I am or not. Where by the time you get 10 years down the road to Al Bundy, it's a very similar situation, but there's no more no more gusto in him
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah,
He's just like,
everybody's
oh.
beaten down.
Yeah. And the other thing is just his mannerisms and stuff. The way, what's the actor's name? Carol
Carol O'Connor.
His way that he acts as Archie Bunker is super similar to David Brent from The British Office. Like, you can really tell Ricky Gervais is pulling a lot from those mannerisms and stuff, and just his movements and his facial expressions. I couldn't believe how similar it was. It's like, man, I bet dollars to donuts that Ricky Gervais watched a lot of All in the Family growing up.
In the interview that I heard with Norman Lear, he said that as soon as he saw Carol O'Connor was quite a well-known actor before that in movies, and I've seen him in other things before this. But he said as soon as he saw him, he said that he's Archie Bunker. There's nobody else who could play that role, and I agree. I can't imagine anybody else being able to pull that off.
Yeah.
Because you're right, the facial expressions every once in a while, and they're so subtle, but they're there. Just, the little flick of the eyes, the little raising of the eyebrows, and it's just there for a second.
He even has a weird way of looking directly at the camera, breaking the fourth wall, like looking at the audience without seeming like that's what he's doing, which is like, I've never really seen that. That's a mistake usually if someone looks toward the camera, but he was doing it all the time and it just seemed natural. And it's obviously a really hard line to walk, like if you tipped that character, one way or the other, it just wouldn't come off the same. Like, you've really got to walk that line of like he is the butt of the joke, but he's also supposed to be sympathetic, and he's got all these opinions that are wrong, but you have to be able to understand why he has them. And it's like, yeah, it's a lot going on there, which is just again, I mean, I really keep just dogpiling on King of Kensington, but King of Kensington to me felt like, let's make up a fantasy version of how a working class man is, where this feels like, let's make a guy. Let's make an actual guy. Or it's like, man, what's that? It's like, man, there's like a term for this in writing, but it's where it's like the writing evolves out of the situation and out of the characteristics of the people in the piece. And then the King of Kensington style is, we've got a goal at the end and we just need to get to the goal, and it doesn't matter if everything feels fake on the way. Where I feel like All in the Family, there's not a goal. It's more just, let's set up a mechanism of these people and watch it happen, So it's a lot more natural, feels a lot,
And there
way
was a
better.
lot in that. That was a 1.5 hour show, wasn't
Yeah.
it? That there was a lot happening in that show. Not just introducing characters, but they seem to cover every gamut of anything that you could make a prejudiced remark about in the world. They seem to have touched on all of it.
That's
Well,
one of-
since the day is still young, why don't we pick a second All in the Family and watch? There must be another one that you can just pick right up from there.
Conveniently enough, I do have another one here. We'll just wrap up the podcast here. But on the top 10, again, I went down the top 10. It's season 3, episode 21, Everybody Tells the Truth. And this seemed like, of the top 10, the lightest one. Everybody Tells the Truth. From what I understand, it's sort of like a maybe Rashomon is too highfalutin an example, but it's like, here's Archie's version of the story, and here's the other guy's version of the story, and then Edith, here's the real version of the story, just type of thing. So yeah, we'll wrap up the podcast there, but we're gonna watch another All in the Family. Yeah, so next week I'll dig up Till Death Us Do Part, I believe it was called, the British one.
Here's how we'll finish this off. We're taking a few words from Archie Bunker's book. Shut up, meathead.
Stifle it, Edith.
Stifle. Stifle, stifle.